It's a museum day. We're here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, my local museum in New York. And I'm going to take you around this place and show you my favorite things in here. It's very appropriate for me to start this tour with a statue of Pilayar, or Ganesh. This is one of my favorite objects here at the Met. It's a Chola bronze made in India in the 12th century. As a kid growing up, when I was taken to the Hindu temple, the way I was introduced to Pilayar, this god, was in the seated form. And for my whole life, that's really how I've seen this figure. So coming to the Met for the first time and seeing standing Ganesh was very unusual. But I think it's, as a piece of art, so beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, that I have been inspired to reproduce this in clay. The first time I did my own firing, I sculpted a Ganesh out of red clay that I put into the firing with all my flower pots, because he is the Lord overcomer of obstacles. So in Hinduism, we pray to him first before praying to any other deity. That's why we're starting with him, just as an act of symbolism. I have to admit that there is a little bit of controversy when I visit a gallery in a museum and see these Hindu statues, because they're sort of displayed here as works of art, but the origin of these statues is something sacred, and this statue specifically would have originally been made to be worshipped in a temple or in a home shrine. And many of the objects like this, like these bronzes that are of deities, were stolen out of temples and acquired by collectors and eventually museums. So when I look at this, I really see it as that figure that would be in a temple, that would be clothed and bathed and worshipped for hundreds of years. And there's a bit of melancholy for me as a Hindu to see this statue, as beautiful as it is, behind glass, taken away from its home. Nevertheless, I'm still inspired by it. Chola bronze, another one of my favorites. This is Lord Shiva as Nataraja, the Lord of the dance. Natam is dance in Tamil, and Raja is king. King of dance. When I was growing up, one of my close cousins practiced Bharatanatyam, classical South Indian dance, and in her house, her mom had brought back a statue of Nataraja and placed it in the living room, and I just loved that thing. I used to look at that thing all the time. This is a form that is still produced in India in bronze, but this particular statue also goes way, way, way back. This is from the 11th century. So over 1,000 years old, this statue, and it's unchanged. So Shiva is in the dancing pose, and what he represents is the cosmic energy, the way the world works, and he's surrounded by a ring of fire. And my favorite part about this statue is right at the very bottom, which I used to look at as a kid on my aunt's statue. Shiva is standing on something, and what his resting foot is on top of is a little demon, and the demon's name is Apasmara. So when I finally ended up studying this officially, it was in university. I took a course in Hindu art, and I learned that Apasmara represents ignorance. Shiva is standing on ignorance, quelling it. And I found that really beautiful, that there's so much symbolism in this statue. There's so much representation of what this world is. And this statue, part of this statue is showing us that ignorance is really the root of all evil. I love that element of this so much. In my life, I have always been a bookworm. I love reading. And to me, one of my greatest possessions, I think, is the ability to take in knowledge and to learn and to be open-minded about other cultures and religious practices and the way different people all around the world do different things, and how all of those different things are wonderful. And when I see this, when I see Apasmara, especially in a religious context, it reminds me of the hurt and the pain and the ignorance that can come from one culture saying something else is bad or evil or wrong. Worshipping idols in many cultures is a no-no, is a definite no-no. And I had a question about this as I was growing up. Why do we worship idols? And when I actually started studying Hinduism, the research revealed something that I just found so beautiful. It's not worshiping what we think is a man in heaven. It's focusing on an idea and an energy. And this is just a means of closing our eyes and envisioning something that represents something deep inside of us. So for me, thinking about the power of wisdom and knowledge and education is linked to this right here. And that's what I find so beautiful about the Hindu culture, is that there are visual representations of a potentially abstract idea. And one more bronze. This standing Parvati is from the 10th century, so even older than the other two. This is from the 900s, and this is also from the Chola period. So I love this thing. I love if I could take one statue home and actually have in my possession, it would be this standing Parvati. I've looked at bronzes that are for sale today that are still made in India. I have one in my house. I have a Saraswati. And the detail of this Parvati is what makes the Chola period. When I say Chola period, the word Chola refers to a dynasty of rulers, of kings, the Chola kings. So this was made under their reign, and this time period in Indian art is considered the finest specifically for bronzes, because the sculptors working at that time, the details are immaculate. And on this Parvati, specifically her fingers are so graceful and beautiful. You know, I compare the fingers of this Parvati to my Saraswati at home, and the Saraswati at home that was made within the last 10 years is kind of crude. When I visit this gallery, I stand and I look at this and I actually circle it to look at all of the details of the cloth that she's wearing on her legs, the jewelry, the belt specifically, it's like the ornateness of the belt, even her bracelets. there's the detail in the bracelets very similar to mine, which is a very old form of an Indian bangle, two animal heads that come together. And you can see traces of that right here. I just love this so much, this Parvati. Look at her hair. Look at the ringlets. Look at her ringlets of hair. So beautiful. This little study right here, I don't know if it's a study or just a very quick sketch, but this is by a very famous painter, Ingres. Some people might read his name and pronounce it as Ingres, which is incorrect. But this little sketch by Ingres, I love so much. We're very familiar with this painting by Ingres. This is not the finished version. This is a grisaille, an underpainting. So you may know that one. So that is the artist that did this little sketch of a friend. And I love this because it's unfinished and it's quick. And when I'm walking around a museum and I'm looking at famous pieces of art, it's wonderful to see finished paintings. But for me, as a painter, it's so valuable to see something like this and to see the painter's process. How did they do something when it was kind of casual or it wasn't meant to be hung in a public setting? And the intimacy of this sketch is the sort of thing that I want to achieve as a painter when I'm painting my friends. So whenever I'm in the European galleries at the Met, I come in and I look at this little Ingres painting. So we see the canvas that has the underpainting of like a cream color, and we have the lady's head, and we have a bit of the background, which is the black, that adds contrast to the skin. But what I love so much about this painting, like what I just go crazy over, are these lines. The line that is the back, her back, where it's just a tiny sketch of the paintbrush and there's no flesh tone at the bottom there. And then I love the two lines that delineate probably what was the edge of her dress, either the edge of her dress or a necklace, but they're so quick. It's like boom, boom. And those two brush strokes that were done like this, they show the confidence of the painter. He wasn't going like this, like, which, I'm making that imitation because that was me. That was me when I first started painting, like, is this the shape, like, And in drawing classes, I've been taught, don't put down tiny little lines because you're hesitating. Take a chance, put it down in one stroke. And if it's wrong, erase it and try again. That's how you learn. That's how you learn to put down quick strokes that are accurate. You look, you might measure, you might hold your pencil at the angle and check what is the angle of her dress. And then you step away from the canvas and you put the stroke down, and you can see it here. So we have her head, we have that beautiful highlight on her hair, we have the profile, her beautiful profile in contrast to the black, but then at the very bottom of the painting, it's unfinished, and we see the bones, we see the bare bones, almost the artist like completely naked in his technique, right there at the bottom. Very, very famous artist, Ingres, exposing himself. That's why I love this. I play a game with my friends when we come to the Met. When we all walk around, we play this game. Okay, if you could take one painting home, what painting would it be? And for me, if I could take one painting home from the Met, it would not be a Sargent, actually. It would be this painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme, and it's called Bashi-bazouk, painted between 1868 and 1869. This is like painted in something that was fashionable at the time, the Orientalist style, dressing up a dark model in costume like this and painting them as some kind of fictional character. This guy wasn't really wearing these clothes out there. He was dressed up by the painter. We have other paintings by Gérôme, like other sitters wearing the exact same turban and holding the same weapons. So we know that these were props that were used by the artist to create a scene. But as a painting, there are so many things about this that to me are just like the composition, the figure, the way the figure is sitting and he's looking over his shoulder, the colors, that gray against the pink, and then the fabric, the way that this silk is painted is incredible. Two years ago, I was a copyist here at the Met. The copyist program is something that has been going on since the museum opened in the late 1800s. Every year, they invite painters to come in and copy a work of art of their choosing. This is traditionally in Western art how painters learned to paint. They went to school, but then they went into museums and they copied the works by the masters. This portrait by Ilya Repin, a Ukrainian Russian-born painter, is a painting of a writer, Garshin, and I just think this is fantastic. So much of the painting is loose, like Garshin's desk and his papers. Even his hands are so roughly painted, but his face, and specifically his eyes, it's like Repin went from rough and loose around the edges, and the closer he got to Garshin's face, and the closer he got to his eyes, the more in focus everything becomes. This writer ended up killing himself. He struggled mentally, and when you look into those eyes, Repin has really captured something there. That's the emotional side of the painting. Purely aesthetically, another thing about this painting for me is just the color scheme. These blocks, we have the black of his clothing and the black of his hair and his beard, and then this like beautiful, soft, creamy blue background, which sits in contrast to the yellowy desk. Yellow, blue, complementary colors, classic, like foundational art stuff, used very beautifully here in a subtle way. This is fairly new, this little installation in this corner of the Met. And when this popped up recently, I was just like, "Wah." Again, studies for me, seeing a study in a museum is like gold for me, to see how artists did their homework or their studying. And this here is a study of a head. So I have been taught how to paint skin, but in almost every single one of my classes, the model is white. The model has white skin. So when I'm being told by the instructor what colors to mix, we're looking at the model and I'm being taught how to paint light skin. And recently I was faced with this dilemma of having no idea how to paint my own skin. And I was like, what? How do I not even know how to paint my own skin color? And it was a revelation that in many classes in schools, the models are white, and what I'm learning to paint is white skin. So this set me down a kind of rabbit hole of learning how to paint darker skin tones, and I had to actually hire my teachers privately to come to my apartment to help me learn how to do this. And that is what I did. Marcelo Del Doce, who was a fantastic watercolor painter, he came to my place, we had a model, he showed me how to paint Clayton's skin. I did the same thing with Diana Butrigo in oil. And seeing this in here, which is a study from the 1840s, was really inspirational for me. An artist working on painting this man in the 1840s, a very different palette from something like this, which is another study. This is a study of a nude figure. And the reason I love this is because this is the sort of thing that I am doing in the atelier training that I've embarked on over the last 4 or 5 years. In these tiny, quiet rooms, we have a model, and I have been taking these classes where we're learning the old way, how to draw the figure accurately, intense study of anatomy, and then how to paint the figure. So this is by Courbet, very famous painter from the 1840s, and this is a fantastic, an incredible nude study. This would have been painted from life, from a model in this pose over the course of days or weeks. This is the museum's open storage collection. They're storing things, why not store them in glass where people can see the items? And I really love walking around the open storage section. A lot of the things in this section are utilitarian household objects like silver and glass. And I come here, I look around, and sometimes I get inspiration. Like I get inspiration for something that I'm making or painting or drawing. Another little game that I like to do is look, like for example, I'm looking at the spoons and going, oh, I have that at home. There's a spoon in here, right at the very back, that I've always noticed the bowl of the spoon is like pointed. It's kind of like a grapefruit spoon, like right in there. And it has a plain fiddle handle, and it has a monogram engraved on it. It's exactly like one of those spoons in this little section here. It's a fun little thing of looking at the antiques in the museum and then going home and enjoying my own personal antiques.
Also like want you to go see them. Yeah. So they built these display cases where you can kind of see things
I recently made some porcelain beakers when I was up at Guy Wolf's place. In the fall, we always make porcelain things. And we were talking about making something different. So Guy pulled out some books of early American pewter. And in those books, we saw this beautiful shape of a beaker, very simple, late 18th century. And then I made the porcelain shape as the shape of one of those beakers. And there's one right here. This is silver, but that's exactly what was in Guy's pewter books. So there was a silver beaker over there, but here are the pewter versions. So that, I mean, this might have been the exact beaker that was in Guy's book, but that is the form that I made in porcelain, that exact shape with the beautiful foot, that simple, elegant base. I love doing this. Just coming and looking at these things. You know, you don't have to own them to enjoy them. You can just look at them. It's fun. Cornici frames, beautiful gilded frames. Someone has frames in their storage locker, kind of like this. You know, we go to museums and we see these paintings on the wall and they're beautiful, but the frames are equally as beautiful. And these are frames that are being stored and not used, but it's just so great that the museum is putting their storage up so people can see this stuff that's not on display. It's just very inspirational. Another little tip about framing something, and I learned this from really looking, like going to museums and looking at how things are/were framed. Just because something is small, like the work of art is small, it doesn't mean the frame has to be equally as small. Historically, sometimes a painting was a small painting, but the way it was sort of showcased to be a jewel was by putting a small painting in a very large, like a big frame, like this over here. Look at how big that opening is. That's 8 by 10, that opening. But the frame is like, what is that? It's like a 12 by 14 inch frame. It's so much bigger than the work of art. But that on the wall it changes the work of art. So recently someone acquired one of my watercolor paintings, and it was a small painting, and she asked for my advice. She said, "How do you think I should frame this?" And she had a couple of suggestions, and I said, "I think you should take this watercolor," it was a still life of fruit, and you should put it in a frame that's like 6 inches wide, big, like a big ebonized black frame, which I have done myself in my apartment, and it looks spectacular. It makes it much more of a showcase of that little piece of art. You learn these things by just looking. Oh, look at this little that right there. I love those very simple gilded frames, like plain but like real gold leaf. United States, 1810, wood gold leaf. I have a few of those. I save those for dog paintings. Like when I get a commission to paint a dog, I put it in an antique gilded frame, and I have a few little ones. I'm waiting for a very little dog to paint, because little dog will go into a little frame. Maybe. We are going to end in the classical Grecian art section of the Met. And there's a tiny display of jewelry in here that I love. This chain from the 4th century BC, and those bracelets from between 450 to 400 BC. I come in here and I I just look, and this chain specifically, I've looked at this so much that recently, last year, I was looking at that and I thought, I want to learn how to do this. I want to wear a chain that is woven that way and made out of that kind of gold. Got to find that person. So I left the Met and I went home and I started doing research, and finally I found Nancy Modica, a jewelry artist, a goldsmith working in Brooklyn, who works in ancient Greek gold techniques. And I spent about 4 months with Nancy while she taught me how to weave gold chain out of 22 karat gold that we actually alloyed ourselves. So that started my gold chain that I wear, my gold chain that I love, that was made from melted down family gold, stuff that we weren't really using or wearing, started from this display case here at the Met. That's what this museum means to me and does for me, inspires me. The ancients, although they seem cold and dead and behind a glass case, to me, they're not. They are still alive. Their craftsmanship, their mastery over these materials, they are so alive. And when I come and I look at these things, I feel that. And I leave and I go out there in the real world and I make them a part of my life too. Thank you for joining me today for my tour of my favorite things here at the Met. If you're in New York City, come walk around and find your favorite things.